Okay, we are live. I'll add the splash sheet and all that later on. I'm a bit behind, I'm afraid, hence I'm starting 3 minutes late. So the YouTube version will be as snazzy and fantastic as normal. I was just keen to not let anybody give up as we are 4 minutes late. So welcome to RunChatLive. We are at episode 38, which is actually the second in season 2. I just introduced a new season when the RunChatLive conference finished last year. And hopefully last week you caught Matt Fitzgerald, which was a fantastic way to start the year. And I can pretty much guarantee that it's not going to go down here from then. The next guest who I'm having today was particularly worried. Hey, evening to Mike James, just saying hi. Thanks for joining us, mate. Look forward to hearing your input later on. Actually, we'll be talking about you in a second. There's a connection, a big connection here. But anyway, so yes, my next guest, I'm very excited. You might have wondered, who's he going to get after Matt Fitzgerald? Well, believe me, the next person who I'm going to bring on shortly is equally, if not more influential in terms of real-time running injury and prevention and putting evidence-based information out there. First of all, I should say thank you to my sponsors, because sometimes I forget, and that's just not the idea at all. So before I bring up the guest, let's just have a shout out for Brighton Beard Company. Seems like every time I do a podcast, it's getting smaller, the beard, but it's still there. It's just a wife and life kind of thing. I have to get a compromise, as any married man will know. But yeah, Brighton Beard Company is still very much sponsoring the podcast. And we do still have a 15% discount if you use the code RCL15, and then you will get 15% off any of their products. And I'm currently waiting for a new set myself of the Alfriston one, still very much my favorite. If you've got a beard, you'll understand the smell is something which is just something beautiful you can put on and enjoy during the day. Even during runs, you can put it on and you just feel good about yourself. If you haven't got a beard, that'll sound very kind of weird and offbeat, but if you've got a beard, you'll understand. So do check them out, www.brightonbeardcompany.co.uk, and they're international as well, so wherever you are. Before I bring on my guest, I just want to say as well, again, thanks to Matt Fitzgerald last week. I've had some great emails. Thank you to those who've emailed me saying basically thank you for introducing them to the book. Life is a Marathon is something else. I'm with my kids and I'm still going down into the local kind of park and running into some runners, and they're going, oh, hi, how's it going? It's great. Have you read Life is a Marathon? I'm just annoying the hell out of everyone I meet, because it's such a great book if you're a runner, but also if you've got any kind of sense of altruism in you and you like knowing about people's struggles and appreciating the struggles that people go through to try and kind of educate yourself, then this book is something else. Audible, buy it, look at it. It will change most of you. It will change your lives in a good way of understanding the struggles that Matt's been through with his wife, Nataki, and how they've come out the other end. There's still problems with her bipolar disorder, but it's a great read. So do that. And obviously the podcast is still there. The interview I did with Matt is still up on YouTube. So do check it out. Conferences, the recordings are still being sold, which is fantastic to me. They're like 26 odd pounds or something for an hour presentation. Ian Griffiths seems to be at the top of the leaderboard. People are still very keen to get their hands on Ian. So yeah, they're still available at the website. So I'm just going to let you know that, go to www.runchatlive.com and you can listen to all 10 plus the 2 question times of last year's RunChatLive conference. And you can also get your hands on lovely me on a t-shirt if you want to support the podcast, and that's great. We've got the lovely Courtney there, Dr. Courtney from gatehappens.com, I'm still going to use her because I think it's just such a great little image there of her opening up the present and putting it on. So thanks, Courtney. So they're still available as well. Right, blurb out the way. Let's just say hello to Terry as well, Terry Vaughan. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming in this evening, Terry. I hope you're very well. What have we got for you today? Well, let's just put this on screen first of all, and I'll put his lovely photo up there whilst I'm talking. I'm going to bring you and introduce some of you to Dr. Kevin Maggs, who is going to talk about load and capacity model, because it's something that's so important, I believe, for runners and clinicians in not the war against injury, but understanding how you can reduce the risk of injury, understanding how clinicians should assess when people come in pain, understanding how to manage pain or injury, and also links with performance as well. So it's a fantastic concept which clinicians have often got the challenge of being able to explain to runners, and runners have got the challenge of staying tuned in, because it is a little bit of listening and understanding. It's not as easy as lying down, just having someone give you a rub. There's a little bit more to it. But we know that that is the case if you want to reduce injury risk and deal with injury and pain. So very looking forward to bringing him up. And I'm just going to check there's nothing else. I'm glad Mike James is in the room, because like I said, I think I tweeted out a while ago, if I'd had an 11 not to say he couldn't come. I'm not saying if I'd had wanted another speaker after choosing 10, it would have been Dr. Maggs. I wanted him there from the beginning, but he wasn't able to make it. So probably because I didn't give enough notice. But if there had been another speaker at the conference, then it would definitely have been Dr. Kevin Maggs. And he was honoured such at the end by Mike James, who was one of the speakers, with a quote there supporting the idea of strength training, which is great. And I think everyone I know loves the way he put this together. So very good to have him in person. So without further ado, I will put this back down there, and I will bring up, and we can all say hello to Dr. Kevin Maggs. There we go.
Hey,
Dr. Maggs. Hey, it's good. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor. Considering the guests that you've had on this podcast, I was wondering why you wanted little old me on here, but it's an honor.
Well, you've just answered my question, because modesty is something which I'm always kind of like tuned into. I love people who are great, who I think are great, but also got that little tweak of modesty. So you've answered your own question. You're a great person and you're modest. So thank you very much. Where are you at the moment?
In Virginia, in the U.S.
Fantastic. That's nice as well.
Yeah. Born in Canada and then moved here.
That's right.
Yeah.
Whereabouts in Canada whereabouts were you born?
In Ontario.
Ontario.
Yeah, I went to, my undergrad was at University of Waterloo with Stu McGill was my biomechanics professor when he was a nobody. Nobody knew who he was. And so that's where I learned about biomechanics.
Indeed. And does that mean you've got a tie-in with, because you've worked with Greg Lehman in the back, also worked with Stu McGill? What was the kind of...
I mean, I never worked with Stu. He was my professor. Greg worked with Stu, right, as far as I know. But me and Greg worked together a tiny bit because he worked for the running clinic.
Exactly.
The group that I teach for now. But then he got too big for it and he went off on his own.
That was another reason your name was kind of being mentioned quite a lot at the conference, because JF was obviously there, which was fantastic.
Right.
JF to speak. So there was the link with JF and Mike mentioning you. So yeah, you were mentioned quite a lot at the conference, I think. That's why I say you were practically there in person. It was good.
It's good to hear.
So I do hope that it took people to your webpage. Talking of you and the history and people getting to know about you, I realized today that I've actually followed you for 7 years, which made me realize how old I am. But it was back in, let's bring this up here.
I suppose I have to reciprocate that then. That means I'm old too.
I think you wrote this when you were 12 or something, so it's fine. You were very ahead of your time. But it was something which personally I use still, especially when I'm teaching massage and kind of early sports therapy, because it was such a great introduction. I believe it was ahead of its time. It's such a great introduction to anybody who wants to kind of just introduce the idea of it's not all about structure. We can't expect people to we shouldn't expect people to squat with their knees in line with their toes. And if we see someone with their knees out doing a kind of a bit of a Liam Gallagher walk, then it doesn't mean, do you know Liam Gallagher?
I don't.
That reference was totally lost on you.
No.
No, it's amazing that someone doesn't know Liam Gallagher. There's a little band called Oasis here in the UK, which are quite famous. And, and Liam is one of the Mank brothers who kind of walks with his knees facing out. I haven't done the Craig's test on him. I don't know whether he just walks out to look like a geezer, but he's a good example of somebody whose knees are always out. So just to open that up, imagine that people are listening to this podcast, because we do try to appeal to runners and clinicians who are quite new to the profession. What was that all about, the Craig's test and the video you made kind of 7 years ago?
So the name of that website is called Running Reform, and that's that actually dates back, I think, to 2000. Not that particular post, but the website dates back to 2009-ish.
Wow.
I was working for this triathlon company called Rev3, and And it was like I was basically hired to treat all the pros and travel around the country treating all the pros and some age group athletes. And every time someone would come in, they would have this chronic running injury, and one of the questions I would have was, has anybody watched you run? And the answer typically is, I went to a running shoe store and they did the whole treadmill thing for the shoes, but that was about it. And so I thought, somebody has to get gait analysis out for the masses. So I started this website called Running Reform, where people could submit videos and a brief history of their injury and schedule a time, and then they would log into my computer. We would watch the video together. I would tell them what's going on with their gait, give them some exercises to do, and they'd be on their way. But I obviously became pretty disillusioned with that quickly, because it's pretty hard to do a gait analysis when you don't know what their structure originally is. Like if they have femoral anteversion or something and they have a dynamic knee valgus, is that because of structure or is that because of function? Like it's next to impossible to know. Plus the fact that, somebody has lateral knee pain and they say, oh, I have IT band problems. It could be a stress fracture. It could be a meniscus. It could be patellofemoral. It could be a nerve entrapment. Like you have no idea. And you're telling them what to do based on what they told you it was. So I quickly bailed on that idea of doing an online gait analysis. But this was one of the articles that sort of spurred that on, is like you can't really tell how people are supposed to move if you don't do an exam on them, as you know.
So
and it's not just femoral anteversion, it could be tibial torsion or, forefoot varus or whatever. I mean, the structure is going to dictate a lot of how we function.
So I'm sure there's, just to put some kind of an idea of, I'm sure there's an awful lot of people still out there. I'd say probably 80% of people who go to personal trainers without having to go to personal trainers who are still being told your knees have to be over your feet when you squat.
Right.
And that's the kind of take-home message from this. And that will, if anyone's listening to this podcast and we say, you know what, you might be one of these people whose knees shouldn't be over your toes. It might be perfectly natural for them to kind of either rotate out or rotate inwards. What's the reason for that? What is the structural phenomenon which you were talking about, which could mean that it's perfectly normal for your knees not to point in line with your toes?
Right. So the idea is, that's kind of the way we grow, right? Like our tibia could grow with some rotation. The femur could grow with a little bit of anteversion or retroversion. In other words, the femoral neck, if there's any therapists watching, they know that it could be angled forward or backward. And that's going to dictate whether your toe and your knee are going to point outward a little bit. And that's just natural. And if somebody tells you should squat with your knee forward, you have to rotate your leg probably out of the central part of the joint to get it to get straight, and then you're putting yourself at risk for an injury simply to make somebody happy, to make them aligned.
So
and we don't necessarily all have to be aligned.
What could be some of the repercussions of somebody who's been told, for example, by their therapist or personal trainer to get those knees in line with the toes, if they have got a different shape, like you say, femoral neck, and they're naturally not supposed to be in alignment, what would be a potential kind of symptom of forcing that alignment?
Yeah, you're just going to place abnormal stress on whatever joint you're rotating to get in there. So the example that I used, which was a real example on that blog post that accompanied that video, it was a triathlete, a cyclist, who was coming in with hip pain because when she was pedaling, her knee was coming in close to the center tube, and she went to get a bike fitting, and they said, well, that's not good. You can't have your knee go in. That's because, your foot is off. So they gave her a medial wedge in the shoe to force her knee out, and then she developed hip pain because of it. That was her knee going in was the natural movement for her hip, and somebody was forcing her out of it. Which actually dovetails into the whole topic of what we're talking about today, the load capacity thing. Like somebody wanted to throw a biomechanical diagnosis at her when that really wasn't the original cause of why she was having pain. She was just, the load that she was applying on the bike was exceeding the capacity because she had a training error. But they threw a biomechanical fix where it wasn't really deserving, and then they created problems.
It's I think also there's some nice photos on YouTube showing that just the variety you can have of the femoral head, and like you say, it could be the technical terms if you're a new therapist, don't get worried about it too much, but you basically can have the neck pointing so that it sits inside your hip socket just at a different angle. So it's going to knock everything out of sync. Not everybody has. Most people, you could argue, do, but what we know about anatomy is you can't really go by most. It's just as important as the person who's going to have naturally knees pointing in. I think it's interesting as well, those of you who have grown up or maybe still tell your kids or were told as a kid that if you sit in that W position, then you need to put braces on or you need exercises. You've got to pick them up because you're going to, I think, well, the W position, what's your comment on that? How does that link in with it, Kevin?
Right. So as the bone is developing and they're sitting there, you know, if you can imagine like a little kid sitting on the ground with their legs pointing forward, with their knees bent and their feet out to the side, that sort of forms that W. And it forces the femur, the thigh bone, to be internally rotated chronically, and then the bone starts to grow like that. And so then they get this femoral anteversion. But I mean, it could be femoral anteversion, it could be acetabular anteversion, it can have all sorts of anatomic variances. There's certainly a lot of research as far as like even in the upper extremity, if somebody grows up throwing a ball a lot, like and they're right-handed, there's going to be more external rotation available on their throwing hand compared to the other hand, but there's going to be less internal rotation in that shoulder because the humerus grows with a twist because they're always throwing with the shoulder in external rotation. It's just an adaptation to the mechanical load that you're applying to it as your bones are growing.
Definitely. So there you go.
It's not pathologic is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
You know?
So yeah, it's a good opener for people who, for runners, not just runners, any sports people who have been told different, who are receiving therapy on the basis that everything needs to be in alignment. Right. Then it's just, there's a red flag there basically. If your therapist is currently telling you this pain is because you're not in alignment, unless you're a power lifter or a weightlifter or something like that where you are taking massive forces, I think the evidence is there. But if it's talking about everyday life and not massive forces, you need to be a bit wary of someone who explains everything down to...
And that's some of the difference that we have to keep into account when we talk about runners, right? It's high repetition, low load. So these biomechanical variances and anatomic variances don't seem to matter as much as other sports. I know since Mike James is paying attention on this podcast, that he did a great job of mentioning that, you know, in his talk regarding strength training. Like there's that good review, Lawrence, I think, where it was, you know, 50% reduction in overuse injuries through strength training. But that's in other sports. When you look at running, strength training and strength, like the existence of strength in runners doesn't seem to vaccinate you against injury at all. And so, you know, we have to be careful what we're talking about when we look at these papers.
I think that paper in particular is, yeah, I mean, it caught me. I was very keen. I jumped on the bandwagon for a while. I think most therapists did, quoting it as, see, strength training reducing injuries by 50%. Yeah. And but it's healthy. That's what happens. And none of us are kind of embarrassed or disappeared. We're still all here quoting papers, but we're knowing that, you know what, in a year's time, we might be retracting that statement a little bit.
Yeah, well, there's a little confirmation bias probably.
Yeah, I mean, it happens, you know, and I'm sure, you know, we're still doing it and long may it go on because it shows we're keeping in touch with research and we get a bit excited by it. So, yeah, it's totally normal. Kevin, you've got Christopher Johnson in the room. Christopher Johnson's a very busy man. So, yeah, there you go. He didn't come in for Matt Fitzgerald. He came in for Kevin Maggs.
Nice to see you, Chris.
Yeah, there you go. And also a shout out to Chris Kitson, the other Chris as well, who's great to see you, Chris. Looking forward to getting Chris is a great therapist from the UK who I definitely want to get on the podcast for someone who's setting up. I see him as the modern therapist. He's got the Movement Hub in the UK and posts these videos. Have you seen it? Oh, it's just great. I can't wait to have him on here because he has everyday people doing exercises, which are just really, really good stuff.
A little younger than you and I.
Oh, gee. Well, he's one of these, I think he's actually about 90, but he's got this baby face because he's got children and everything. You know, he has had sex, but he just looks like somebody. He just looks like somebody who's kind of eternally going to be 15 years old.
Right.
But yeah, really, 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 really nice bloke. So, right. So yes, the Craig's test. And so you've done it again. I mean, you've done it a lot of times, but what brought us on to today is this time in BJSM, you had a fantastic article based on a video you did about load and capacity, which is something that's been welcomed, I think, heavily. And that's why you're on today to talk about that. Do you want to kind of introduce that piece and what stimulates
I mean,
you to write it?
I think we have to keep in mind it wasn't my idea. Like, I didn't come up with this. I'm standing on the shoulders of all these other researchers who have put all this together. But, the idea is I'm getting a little tired of patients coming in telling me that, they're out of alignment or their leg length is off, or they overpronate, or their sacrum is out of place, these types of things. And that, injury and pain don't really come down to that. It's more of this load capacity relationship. And so what I explain to my patients is fairly simple. I say, every tissue has a capacity. So let's say somebody comes in with like a knee pain, let's say. Your knee tissues have a certain capacity, and if you apply a load that's significantly greater than that capacity, you have a higher risk of injury. It's not automatic, like injury risk doesn't equal injury rate, but you have a higher risk of injury. And what we want to do is apply that load greater than the capacity in a way that gives it time for the capacity to adapt. So if you give your body time to adapt, it's totally okay to increase the load beyond the capacity, but we have to do it in a way that gives the body time to adapt. And if you do it too quickly, then you have a higher risk of getting injured. So on that load side, some people would call it the external load. We're talking about, your running volume, the running frequency, the running intensity. If you've changed footwear acutely, that's a change in the load. If you've added hill work, those types of things, training aspects are the external load. If you want to, if you read in Runner's World that a forefoot strike is better than a rear foot strike, and all of a sudden you switch your running technique, that's a change in the external load. So you're going to apply a load to tissues that aren't used to it at a faster rate than your body could adapt, and you have a higher risk of getting injured. And so I go through that with my patients, and the first thing that I'll do when they complain of an injury is ask them about any changes in this external load. Oftentimes they say, no, everything's fine. I didn't change a thing with any of those things. Sometimes you have to really dig deep to find out because they don't really recognize that they've changed something. But if everything's fine, then you have to look at the internal load, because we have lots of papers that show that these things like stress, like psychological stress, sleep, medications, right? Like Cipro, statins, corticosteroids are all tenotoxic. They all affect the tendons, so what medications they're on. All these internal capacity aspects play a big role in injury, because every time you go to run, you sort of tear apart the tissue a little bit, just a little bit, and then your body recovers it, and it heals it, and it makes it stronger. But if your ability to recover is hampered because you're stressed out, because you're not sleeping well, because you're ill, because you have diabetes, whatever, there's a lot of different factors, so we can get into all the different factors on the capacity side. There's still that imbalance where your capacity is dropped because you're stressed out and you're not sleeping well, and that is a risk factor for getting injured. And so in its simple terms, it's just load capacity, and people think, oh, that's very, very basic, and it is, and I think it's an easy way to explain it to patients. But as a clinician, you sort of have to get into the details of everything. We can go through some examples today of that.
So I just want to break that down a little bit, because again, I think I mentioned it off air, like one of the challenges, one of the goals of the podcast and the conference is it's often difficult for even clinicians, once they understand and they've got a grasp of this, to explain it to the runner who's probably not interested, who would much prefer to go down the road and have someone stick needles in them and just lie down for half an hour and that's it. Mm-hmm. Runners don't really want to be educated. They don't think they're paying you money to go to school. There's so how would you mentioned, for example, external load and internal load. How would you break that up in layman's terms to a runner and
yeah, I don't say internal load and external load to patients.
So what would you use?
I just say load and capacity. And I say like it. If you have a string and you attach a weight to that string, it's going to hold it. But if you apply a big enough weight, that string is ultimately going to fail. And that's what's happening to some of the tissues. Like on a micro injury scale, you've applied too much load. There wasn't enough capacity in the tissue to take that load. and as a result, you have an injury. But what I don't want to get into is the path of, telling them that they run wrong, or telling them that they have shoes that aren't right for them, or, these things that could take you down the wrong path. For example, last week I had a 17-year-old girl come in. I saw her for a femoral neck stress fracture 2 years ago, right? She was 15 at the time. And we confirmed it on MRI. It was a femoral neck stress fracture. And then she came into me again. She tells me she had tibial stress fractures since I've seen her last. And now she's got pain in the foot. So she's probably got a navicular stress fracture. We're sort of waiting on the MRI right now. And we can go down the path of, you're training poorly, or you're not wearing the right shoes, or you're not strong enough, or, whatever we want to do. But the reality is, I got into the capacity side and I started asking her, okay, what is your diet like? I have a little granola bar in the morning. I have a little salad at lunch, and that's it. So we're getting into the REDS idea, which for the people who don't know, it's relative energy deficiency syndrome, where her caloric intake isn't matching her caloric expenditure. And as a result, her body's hormones are screwed up. So I said, 17-year-old girls don't like to talk to dudes about this, but, how often are you getting your period? Once every 7 or 8 weeks. Okay,
so I'm just going to cut in a sec. This is a really good example and really topical, and it's good. I just want to check. Did you say you saw her 2 years ago for a stress fracture as well?
A femoral neck stress fracture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you have this education with her then? Were you checking about diet and...
I didn't back then, to be honest.
Right.
I don't think I talked to her about it back then. I saw her once.
Okay.
I did, I don't know if the pubic patellar percussion test, I don't know if you're familiar with that. It kind of showed that there was a problem in the bone, so we got an MRI, and her mother emailed me and she said, yeah, it's a femoral stress fracture. And I said, okay, well, you got to go to an orthopedic surgeon, because a femoral neck stress fracture is a high-risk bone stress fracture.
Definitely, yeah.
I didn't want anything to do with it. I was just like, go to an orthopedic.
Oh, fair enough.
We're done.
Yeah. But I was just going to say, because it'd be interesting to know whether it was an example of a patient who comes to see you and you think you've educated them, because obviously with a stress fracture, someone of that age, now we're all clued up and we know, right, we look at the diet, especially if you're 15, you're a girl, let's check out all these things. And she'd come back and had ignored you, because that sometimes happens with patients, doesn't it? You educate it.
Right. But to your question about what do I say to patients, I mean, I think if you explain things to them in a way that, look at, you just did too much. You ramped up, you did a couch to marathon program, in 4 months that was silly. You exceeded the capacity of the tissue, or you switched your gait too quickly. If anything, I know you're saying that patients don't want to be educated. I think in a situation like that, it's a bit reassuring to patients to know that they don't run wrong, because a lot of people will come in and they have the idea that they run wrong. And if you can reassure them that, no, you don't run wrong, you just made this mistake, let's rehab it, and you're going to get back out, but now you're going to have the knowledge that you should have had before to not let this happen again. Because if you don't, it's great for your practice, because they're going to get injured again and they're going to come back and you're going to be very busy, but it's not very good for the patient. So I think it's important that you sort of drive that point home.
And how about, because often runners are pretty good these days at focusing on the external load. Not enough of it, but they're good at, for example, clocking up Strava will tell them how many kilometers. So like you say, some runners believe that they're not having any spikes, that they're just using, increasing the distance or the frequency, intensity gently. But then you start looking at the internal loads and you realize that there has been a spike because, I don't know, went to someone's birthday party and got absolutely obliterated and then tried to continue where they left off. But I find in my practice, it's tricky sometimes explaining to patients or runners that often it's the internal load which is making all the difference, because they're not monitoring it. Yeah. So do you find that there's a bit of a And to be honest, I think I steal a little bit from Derek on that one, Derek Griffin. I mean, he's really good at. I mean, he did a great job in your RCL conference, which was incredible, by the way. Congrats. Thank you very much. I'll be there next year, this year, hopefully.
Like explaining about, okay, my neighbor who's 40 just had a heart attack, but that's understandable because he's under a lot of stress. And people get that understanding of, a physical manifestation of a psychological stress in the form of a heart attack, right? Or people understand it in terms of like, oh, I got sick. My husband didn't. I did because I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was stressed out at work, and so my immune system was down, and I got sick. And so why don't people understand the idea that if they're not sleeping well and they're stressed out, and their diet is like crap, that it can manifest as a physical injury in running? And I think if you explain it in those terms, a lot of people do sort of nod their head and they say, yeah, okay, I get it. That's my experience. You find a different experience on that?
No, that's really good. I'm just enjoying. Was it Derek who said that? Who compared it to the
heart attack? I think so, yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
No, I must have been dealing with something else going on then. That's great. That's really good. That's a really nice. I think that would be a little pearl of wisdom for a lot of people listening to that, because people do understand stress and you have a heart attack. So why don't people understand that stress can also affect running injuries? I like that.
Yeah, and if different people learn different ways, right? Like that's one of the reasons why I make those videos, is because a lot of people are visual learners. You can use examples like that, and some people don't really respond to either of those. So you can easily pull up the Nussbaum article showing that stress is linked with running injuries. Luana Main had a good paper a few years ago, I think it was in 2010, on triathletes, where what she did is tracked triathletes for a year and tracked their training load. And if there was a spike in the training load, there was a spike in injuries. Duh, right? Like we all know that. But she also had them fill out psychological questionnaires every week. I think it was the PALMS. It might have been the MTDS. I'm not sure. But some sort of like questionnaire measuring, their psychological and life load every week. And when there was a spike in that correlated to injury with a stronger correlation than the increase in training load did. So the psychological stress had a bigger influence on injury than the training load. And so, you can pull up studies too. So there's different ways of getting across to different people, either visually with like the video or case examples or research. There's a lot of different ways to get across.
I think I don't know if it's finally happening. There's definitely more research coming out now and people talking about it in our bubble, in our little echo chamber, where they are putting together better quality ways of monitoring load, aren't they, to include the internal load and everything. And like you say, psychological profiles and that. How much do you think it can translate to, how much, we now know that it's probably not enough for a runner just to look at Strava and think that they're not increasing or causing any spikes in load. What else can a runner do if they really want to try and reduce the risk of injury?
That's the dilemma, isn't it?
Well, that's why you're on the show, mate. Step up.
So there's different ways, right? So you certainly, I think obviously it's advisable to look at Strava. For me, when a runner comes in, a serious runner like a marathoner comes in, and I say, okay, let me look at your training plan, and they're like, I don't have a training plan. That's a bit of a red flag right away for me.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are on Strava, and they're on God, I can't remember what's the one that Matt Fitzgerald does training plans on. I don't know why I'm blanking on the name of it. What's that? Training Peaks.
Yeah, Training Peaks. That's the one. Yeah.
So that's one way. So to monitor the internal load, it's difficult. You can, like in like big professional sports, they can do objective tests like salivary tests for cortisol, and you can do immune tests and whatnot. There was a good paper by Anna Saw a couple years ago that looked at questionnaires, the PALMS, the DALDA, the MTDS, and looked at all these questionnaires and compared it to the objective ways of doing it by doing blood markers, and the questionnaires were actually better. So I would default to that. Obviously, your everyday recreational runner isn't going to be doing blood work, so you can do these questionnaires. The problem with that is compliance. To fill out these questionnaires, like some of them are like 70, 80 questions long, and you got to fill that out every week. It becomes a little tedious. So that's one way of doing it. And then another way, I think, not the perfect way, but the better way as far as I'm concerned, is probably looking at heart rate variability. There's a lot of good apps out there that you can do that with. HRV for training is a good one that I use. Not sponsored by them. I'm not mentioning that for any reason. I use it occasionally, but it's not going to cover everything. But the HRV stuff, I think, is probably the easiest, and probably you get the most compliance with, because it's a simple thing. You just stick your finger on the camera on the phone with the light, and it measures your heart rate. And if anybody's watching and they don't know what HRV is, it's heart rate variability. So it's not your heart rate, it's the variability in your heart rate. So if you have like 60 beats per minute of a heart rate, it's not like your heart beats every second. It's going to beat maybe 1.02 seconds, and then 0.8 seconds, and then 1.2 seconds. There's a bit of variability in the heart rate. And when you look at that, if there's a high variability in your heart rate, it's a measurement of your autonomic nervous system. And if there's a high rate of variability, that's a good thing. That means that your parasympathetic system, which is the part of your nervous system that's really involved in rest and recovery, is very active. So that's a good time to maybe increase your training a little bit, because theoretically your body's in a state where it's in good recovery. If your heart rate variability is low, then that's not a great time to really push the training and the intensity very much. But it's not perfect. It's really like it doesn't take into account, let's say you already have pre-existing arthritis, that leaves you a bit vulnerable. Let's say you have some obesity, that's a risk factor. That's one of those ones on the capacity side. There's a lot of different examples that I could come up with factors that it doesn't measure, but it's a beginning point. Kama Damstead came out with that paper about a year ago with Rasmus Nielsen and Laura Malisu, saying that we don't have enough evidence to say that spikes in training correlate with injury rates with runners. And I think it's one thing to say we don't have enough research, which is different than saying it's not true. We can certainly say that there isn't enough research yet, but I don't think we ever will have enough research, because in that paper all they were doing was looking at the external load. They weren't looking at anything with the internal load. And I don't think there's any app or any questionnaire that can account for every bit of capacity. But you can do your best, I think, on the heart rate variability aspect of it.
Interesting. How about, there's the rate of perceived exertion. So that's used quite a lot, isn't it, to kind of make approximations of how your capacity is and how much internal load you're using. So in other words, I've just found that being a dad, I've just found a half-finished yogurt. I've just stepped on that. That is currently, people, all over my feet. For those of you just listening to the podcast, my toes are bathed in strawberry flavored Fuser yogurt. So that's why I'm going to be just rubbing my foot slightly for a while. There we go. Too much information. But anyway, rate of perceived exertion. I think that's something, I've always naturally, I don't know what it is, but I've always, at the end of a run, I think they ask you on a lot of these apps, how did it feel? I think that's often more important than the distance you did and the speed you ran out. Because how you feel is a bit of an indication of maybe how maybe that variability is happening if you have not been sleeping that well, or you have been not, getting enough nutrition, and that you're probably going to feel worse. So is that something you work with your runners much, of getting them?
Sure. Yeah. I'm in total agreement with, Steven Seiler and Matt Fitzgerald on the 80-20 aspect of it. I think, 80% of your runs should be at low intensity. And so then the natural question that follows that is, how do I know if I'm, below my aerobic threshold in zone 1 or 2, if you're looking at a 5-zone scale? How do I know that I'm below that, right? Because that's where 80% of your runs should be. And I don't think you need to go get VO2 max testing to do that, because, if you go get VO2 max testing and they say, okay, this is the heart rate you need to be at below your aerobic threshold, as you just pointed out, day-to-day variability is going to be huge with that, depending on your sleep and your diet and your stress and all the rest of that. So I think it's kind of a bit of a waste of time. You can certainly go by heart rate, but I think the easiest way to do it is just by breathing. If you can just monitor your breathing and stay at a rate of exertion when you're running that you can, sing a song, say the alphabet out loud, those types of things, that's going to dictate your speed. And if you're let's say you look at the heart rate variability and you're very low, so in other words, you're very stressed out, I can almost guarantee when you go out and run that day, if you watch your breathing and stay married to your breathing below that level, you're probably going to be running at a lower pace. You kind of have to ignore the pace and pay attention to your breathing more, right? Whereas other days, you go out for a run and you feel fantastic, and you're running way faster than you normally do, but yet your breathing rate is low. And I think that's probably an easy way to figure out your RPE.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. But I think sometimes it's underrated. I think people should I've always thought as a runner, the better you are at listening to your body, and that is difficult to prove, but probably the better you'll be at reducing risk of injury. There's got to be a link, because if you can tell if you're out there and it's just not feeling quite right and you haven't quite got that, you might not be able to explain why, but probably there's a factor which you haven't noticed or you've overlooked in the internal lobes.
Exactly.
And being able to note that, I think it was Mike James actually, I think he got slammed on Twitter the other day and kind of drop kicked in the face because he's training for MDS at the moment. And he dared to say that he turned a 16-mile run into a 10-mile run because he was just feeling, he other factors. And people were going, and he said that there's no point doing junk miles. If it's not fitting in, then he's prepared to change his. Mike, if you're listening there, then you might want to comment on this. But and he got slammed by people saying there's no such thing as junk miles. Every single mile is important. It's just blah, 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 blah. But he was basically saying you've got to go by how you feel, rather than, because if not, you're increasing the risk of injury.
Exactly.
To your body. But yeah, he got slammed by it, and he actually in the end he just said, "Mate, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. Thanks for interacting."
That's Twitter for you. It's golly. If it's not that, it's somebody chirping about politics, and it's like, I'm here for clinical stuff. I don't want to hear about your politics.
You pulled out of Twitter for a while, didn't you? I think probably for that reason.
I did, yeah. I got frustrated with the hostility.
Yeah, but you came back.
I did. I came back today.
You came back today, didn't you? With your your bit on the 1,000 marathons. That was interesting as well. Mention that actually. Bring that post up. What did you post today? And
it was just a paper that came out that said that they looked at 6 different runners and did MRIs of their knees, and they looked at them subjectively, and there wasn't any knee pain on these people, and there wasn't any observance of these signs of arthritis in their knees in these 6 people. And you're thinking, well, why did they look at these 6 people? And it's because these 6 people had each run over 1,000 marathons each. It's like, I don't know where how do you recruit people for that study? It's that's pretty wild. You got to search high and wide to find that one.
But that's like you said, that's tied into what we're talking about today, isn't it? It's kind of like you can't.
Could you imagine the capacity of those people?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so hold it there for me. You've mentioned capacity a few times. Again, with the idea of potentially the runner or the younger therapist, talk to me about capacity, because what is it that, makes a marathon far less of a risk in terms of load for one runner, that for another one it's kind of, why can't you say that a marathon is a difficult race for every single runner?
Yeah, again, there's so many different factors that go into it. You can't really sum it up in one sentence. There's so many different things. Like, one of the biggest factors with arthritis is just genetics, right? We know there's modifiable factors as far as obesity and exercise and whatnot, but it remains that the unmodifiable one is your genetics. And so there's a lot that goes on with that. So you never really know why things are going on with people, but you really have to, from my point of view as a clinician, you have to dig. My first appointment with people is generally 45 minutes to an hour, and the vast majority of it, 80% of it, is talking to the patients. If we want another example, I had a lady come in a few years ago with knee pain, and she was really frustrated. She had been out of running for a couple of years. Every time she tried to come back, she had knee pain. And we took sort of a comprehensive look at her training plans, her biomechanics, her shoes, everything. And we gradually got her back to running to the point where she was consistently running 40 miles a week, no problem. And then she came back to me about 6 weeks ago with trochanteric pain syndrome. So a tendon problem on the outside of her hip, which we know is really vulnerable to compressive loads, right? And I went through, she was like, I didn't change anything. I know you were going to go with this. I know you're going to ask me what I changed. I didn't change anything, blah, blah, blah. And she was talking about the training, right? So we went through it anyway, and I agreed she didn't change anything. And then I was like, okay, how are you sleeping? How's your diet? How's your stress level?
Oh, we've lost Kevin Maggs halfway during that story. He's just literally disappeared. Is it just Kevin, or are you? Oh, he's back again. Hold on. We haven't got a camera for him yet. Kevin, I haven't got a camera for you at the moment. Yes, we have now, and I'm just going to bring you back. You're back in, mate. We lost you for a second.
I don't know what the heck that was. I don't know where you lost me, but anyway, so we went through.
Yeah, she was basically saying, I haven't changed anything. I know what you're going to tell me, which is always nice.
Internal load was fine. She was like, I got divorced a few months ago. It was a really crappy marriage. I'm really happy now. I got my own place. Couldn't be happier. I got a new boyfriend. Everything's great. I'm happy. I'm sleeping well. And it was just like, I don't know. I don't think anything changed. I don't understand why you got this. And it wasn't until like the third visit that I was doing some rehab with her, and we were chatting, and I was asking about her new man, and she was telling me how great it is. And I said, does it hurt when you're sleeping on that side? Because, trochanteric pain syndrome is vulnerable to compression.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, it's really bad because with my ex-husband, I always slept on my left side.
Okay.
And now with this guy, I always sleep on my right side, and it's killing me.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, there's the thing that changed, And so with your question about why can some people do it and some people can't, like there's so many different aspects, but sometimes an injury with running isn't a running injury. Does that make any sense? Like she had pain when she ran, but it had nothing to do with, like, the causative factor had nothing to do with running.
Yeah.
So there's so many different factors. And obviously, like, again, if you look at your heart rate variability, if you look at a questionnaire, if you look at your acute to chronic workload ratio, none of that is going to pick that type of thing up.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of variables. So I think as a clinician, you just have to be very fastidious in figuring that stuff out. But again, if I were to go bring her on the treadmill and watch her run and figure stuff out, like as far as, your cadence is a little bit low, or you have a little contralateral pelvic drop, that wasn't the problem. It wasn't a running-based problem. And I think the problem that a lot of clinicians run into is they get fixated on that, on the biomechanics and strength and whatnot. But it's fine to do that, in my opinion. I'm not, the expert, but I think it's fine to change someone's gait in an acute situation. If you have chronic exertional compartment syndrome, I mean, there's pretty good evidence that it's okay to switch to a forefoot strike. It offloads that aspect, right? I had a peroneal tendon problem a couple months ago, and for a couple weeks, I had to switch to more of a rear foot strike, and it offloaded the peroneal tendon. But if you're going to change your biomechanics based on an injury, you have to understand that tissue stress doesn't go away. You just move it around. You're just moving it from one tissue to another. So if you're going to take somebody, with chronic exertional compartment syndrome and switch them to a forefoot strike, you're dramatically increasing the load on the Achilles and the calf, and you're now putting that runner at risk of another injury, because that's what causes most injuries, right? Is an acute change in the external load to a point where your body doesn't have time to adapt to it. So I think you really have to be, really judicious in making gait changes, not only for that reason that you're putting some other tissue at risk, but also, the confidence aspects of telling somebody that they've been running wrong. I think there's certain psychological aspects of that. I had a couple of patients a couple of years ago where I every time I change something, I say, look, I think you're a really good runner. We're just going to change this one thing. And in the same week, 2 different people came back and they had running injuries. And I said, did we ever check your running when you came in years ago? And both of them in the same week said, yeah, you said I was a terrible runner. It's like, I know I didn't say that, but that's the way they interpreted it. So I think we have to be careful in things like that,
That's massive. I mean, that could be a whole hour on, the way that patients don't hear what comes out your mouth.
Yeah.
It depends on the words you use. They'll totally translate it. It's true. Just a shout out, because just for people who are listening, if you do join us on the video recording, then you've got the benefit of kind of joining in the conversation, leaving comments. Just a shout out to Michael O'Connell, who's he's put up a comment here saying, first time listening to the show as a new therapist. Fantastic. I love the fact that new therapists are actually tuning in. That's one of the big audiences we're hoping to help with this podcast. Loving it so far. It's even better. Very interesting points. Much appreciated. So thanks, Michael, for joining us. It's really good. It makes my day when I know that I'm introducing new therapists to stars like Kevin. It's good. Do spread the word, and do make sure you come back next week, even if Kevin disagrees. He said he's not a specialist just then. I let that fly. I'm no specialist. Well, if you're not, I don't know who is. But anyway, Michael, thanks so much for writing that comment. That's great.
Where I come down on where I fit on this is like, if I watch the RunChatLive conference, you've got all these big hitters up there. You've got Ian Griffiths talking about orthotics, and you got Simon Bartold on shoes, and you got Izzy Moore on gait, and you got Derek Griffin on psychosocial aspects of it. And as clinicians, you ever see those in the game shows? They have that clear phone booth thing, and it's like a cash volcano, and there's like a fan at the bottom blowing money all around, and they have to like grab the cash. That's kind of what you feel like as a therapist listening to all these experts. You're just trying to grab whatever you can grab from their knowledge, and then you somehow got to pull it together. And I think the load capacity thing tries to do that. Just pulls it all together.
I feel like I need you to lie down on a couch, and I'm just going to talk to you for a while and kind of build up your confidence. I know what's happened to you. You're a recently married man. You should be sitting on top of the world. I know what's happened, mate. You're there with them. Don't put yourself this silly.
I'm talking about those guys do research, and I think clinicians have to get their knowledge from research is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it was great having it, but that was the crossover. It was lovely listening to someone of Izzy Moore, for example, who's a fantastic researcher, but she's not in clinic so much, and she admits herself. I don't think she likes people much. I think in typical researcher form, I think she quite likes to lock herself away with just a treadmill and maybe one person who's been invited in, a student who wants to be there.
And then she'll go make some cakes. Yeah,
exactly. So, I mean, by her own admission, she's out of the kind of actual clinician world because she doesn't want to be there. So it's all very well being a specialist in something, but we do need to all get together and talk and share to be able to, get the whole picture. So that was the idea.
Super smart, though. Everybody at that conference was just
well, like I say, dude, if you're around end of October for the part 2, then if you're there and I can pay you enough, then hopefully we'll put the two together and we'll be able to get you over there. It'd be great. I mean, that was one of the beautiful things about the conference, was just having you guys meeting each other and shaking hands, and Derek Griffin shaking hands with Christopher Johnson, even though they live, I don't know how many 10,000 miles apart or something. It's great. It's cool.
I liked, Chris, if you're still listening, I loved your haircut. It was really good.
Christopher Johnson?
Yeah.
His haircut?
I think I may mirror that haircut.
I can get that. Christopher Johnson was lovely to see in person. What a fantastic guy. So passionate. And it was great. Really nice.
You can tell.
Yeah, it's really good. It was amazing. Anyway, so, look, it's 3 minutes to 9 already. I'm going to have to turn this lounge back into a matrimonial place to relax after the kids in bed in 3 minutes.
And clean up the yogurt on the floor.
Just tell me about it. I just haven't bothered. But the yogurt, I like that. It's nice. We call it yogurt, but of course, your neck of the woods.
Oh, yeah, with an H. Yeah.
Okay, so look, load versus capacity. We've drawn attention to the fact that load is not just about how far you run or how fast you run or how often you do it. There's a load of other factors, and potentially the internal factors, the ones which runners don't think about in terms of trying to measure their load. So that's great. We've talked about measuring it. Anything else you want to chuck in?
One last little thought on that.
Yeah.
The great thing about that load capacity thing, and again, it's not like I developed it, but it's really good at looking into the past to explain why people got injured, right? Because it's an imbalance in that. So that's the past, but then you can still use the load capacity aspect for the present to say, look, we're going to calm it down by lowering that load a little bit. But if you leave that load down too long, the body is great at adapting. So that means the capacity is going to drop. And we don't want that. So we want to do rehab to increase the load gradually in a controlled way to start increasing the capacity, right? And then it's also great for the future because you can say, look at how are you going to stay injury-free or at least reduced risk of injury? You're going to keep that load high by continuing to do the rehab, by running consistently and not having big gaps in your runs and whatnot. And so it's great at, looking at the past, the present, and the future. I think it's an all-encompassing thing.
And you think things are moving in the right direction then? You've mentioned the research and it's I think it's looking quite healthy at the moment.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's...
everything has holes, right? I know Tim Gabbett's acute to chronic workload ratio has come under a lot of scrutiny lately for good reason. It's not all-encompassing, but it's a start.
But he's quite happy for that. I think I listened to him... Who was he on? He was with Ian and Craig. Yeah, I heard him talking to them on RunChatLive, and I think they talked about that. Like, what do you think about the scrutiny you've come under at some convention they went to, I think, in Switzerland or somewhere? And he was like, no, it's fine. It's great. It's what it's all about. We need that. Everyone just nodded like a puppy dog. So, he's coming over to the UK as well. So, he's coming over for Tom Goomes. Have you seen Tom Goom is now doing a running chat conference as well?
Is he?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So,
So I've been off of Twitter, so...
well, this is the thing. I'm very happy about that because it gives me a chance to poach some of his guests, which is great. Which is fantastic. Yeah. No, it's great. It's in May as well. So we've already talked on Twitter. It'll be a really healthy way.
Perfect.
Who's he got coming over? Ian, obviously, because Ian lives down the road. So Ian Griffiths will be talking. He's got Alex Hutchinson coming over.
Oh, perfect.
Which is going to be wicked. And just going to say goodbye to Christopher Johnson, who's got the comment up here on the Miro. Bald wise dudes. He's so cool. Yeah, Chris, he's off for a 2-hour kicker session, so that's fantastic. Thanks for joining us, Chris. Really appreciate it. I know you're a busy man with life, work, and family, and keep putting everything out there, Chris. It's amazing. When I normally catch you when I'm kind of like trying to put the little one to sleep, but fantastic. Oh, Chris Kitson is also hosting Tim 2. It's true. I think with Mike Grice. So, have you been to the UK? Can't remember. Have you been over here recently?
I've been to the UK, but not for professional purposes.
Okay. Well, we'll try and change that. We'll try and get you over in October.
That'd be great.
That'd be fantastic. I definitely want to get you as one of the international speakers. So that'd be good. What's just to finish off? What have you got coming up in the next month or 2 months? What are you working on? What's happening?
I've got another video that I'm getting started on, so it'll be a couple months before that comes out. But lots of teaching for the running clinic, and then just my clinic, everyday life. Yeah.
And are you allowed to tell us what the video's on? Is it going to be a kind of a bit of a cliffhanger?
No, it's going to be on NeoA.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I do love your videos. I do recommend. I'm quite visual as well, and like I said, the video on the Craig's test is there. Or the videos and your content, is it scattered around, or where's the best place to go?
It is scattered around.
It's a bit, isn't it? That was a.
It's I've kind of switched platforms a little bit, but most of them are on Vimeo under Running Reform. That's where I keep most of them.
Is that the best place to go to? Is it?
Yeah.
Have you got any plans to kind of group them together? Because after being on this show, you're going to be a bit more of a star. So, how are you going to react?
I'm starting to put them on YouTube now. Because YouTube, I think YouTube sort of gets better exposure than Vimeo. So,
well, we mentioned at the conference, it's the biggest search engine. Jack Chu was kind of saying it's the biggest search engine out there. Most people are using it now.
Yeah.
And it's something.
So I'm making the transition over to that.
That'd be wicked, mate, 'cause it's worth it. Your videos are fantastic, and I hope that And if people want to contact you, what's the best way? Is it an email or on social media?
At Running Reform on Twitter is a good way.
Is that now going to be the place to catch you? Is it?
Yeah. And then the email is it's just contact@runningreform.com.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'll make sure that they are put in the notes, and we'll add it to the YouTube video afterwards. The time's gone so quickly, mate, and I tell you what,
I appreciate it. It's good.
In terms of drawing people in tonight, it's been like an A-list party without a doubt. We've had Mike James in here, Christopher Johnson in here, Susanna Rogers, who has fantastic content. She's coming in as well.
Yeah, she does.
Fantastic following Susanna. I love the stuff she does. She has said, just for the benefits of the podcast listeners, Susanna Rogers said, but you're a big hit, Kevin. I really appreciate how well you translate the research to understandable words. So that's my sentiment as well, mate. You are well respected out there.
Thank you, Susanna.
Yeah, it's great to see you in here, Susanna. And also Chris Kitson, thank you very much for joining us, and Terry Vaughan and other people who would have to scroll back. But yeah, great to see you all in here. Kevin, I'm going to say thank you and put you back in the lobby again. I will be back. Don't go away. I'll be back in a couple of minutes. We're just going to sign off here.
Awesome.
Yeah, that'd be great to chat to you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, no, thanks very much. We'll talk again in a couple of minutes. Okay, mate?
Yep.
Right, brilliant. What a lovely bloke. Oh, I love modesty. I don't know what it is, but it's fantastic to hear someone who is we've got so much information and experience to help both runners and clinicians, and yet they're still praising others, which is great to hear. So thank you so much to Kevin Maggs. Like I say, I'm going to now see what we can do. I will be trying to get Kevin over for the Run Chat Live Conference 2020, which will be happening at the end of October. I've still got to finalise the date. Definitely it will be happening. I've just got to finalise which Thursday and Friday it will be on. I've had this crazy plan actually maybe of doing it on a Thursday, Friday down south in the UK, and then heading to the north for a Saturday, Sunday repeat. It's something I've talked over with a few people. Might be especially useful for international speakers coming over to do kind of like a 4-day thing instead of 2 days. And it means that people from the north of England, or people who find it easy to fly to the north or have family there, will be able to join us. So that's in. If you've got any comments on that, whether you're a therapist or a speaker who wants to get involved or a runner, then let us know. What do you think about a north-south repeat, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday up north? And also, if you've got a place up north where you'd like to be involved and maybe even host it, probably around Manchester somewhere, then get in contact with me as well, matt@runchatlive.com. Right, I need to vacate the premises. As always, this has come to you from my house because it's 8 p.m. here. It seems to be a happier time to get people involved. So thank you very much for joining us. I need to tell you, normally I haven't got a clue who's coming on next week, but I can tell you now who is going to come on next week. We've mentioned him, not next week, next month. I've mentioned it already. I'll give you the actual date because we've managed to actually put something in the diary. Oh, wow, I didn't expect that sound effect to happen. Here we go. So on February the 13th, Thursday, February the 13th at 8 p.m. UK time, Mr. Alex Hutchinson is going to be our guest on Run Chat Live, which I am absolutely very, very happy about. We're going to be talking about him coming to Tom Goom's May conference in London, and also, what isn't there to talk about with Alex Hutchinson? We'll talk about his book, Endure. I've been a fan of Alex's for years as well, since, as long as Kevin. He's, again, one of the people who changed my career, changed my looks. I'm putting Kevin in the same kind of group there, so that'll make him feel very embarrassed. But, so I'm really excited. So put that in your diary. February edition of 39 will be with Alex Hutchinson, which we're very excited about. And then we're hoping to get Tom Goom on as well. I'd love to get Tom. I've got to pin him down. He's a very busy man, but I'd love to have an hour with Tom as well to talk about the conference. So Tom, if you're listening to a replay of this, then sort out a date, mate, and we'll get together and we'll talk about what you're hoping to get out of the conference and what you're doing lately. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. As always, leave comments, subscribe on YouTube. Like I say, YouTube's real powerful now in getting the word out there. So I put a few links on my social media. If you want to support us, then that'd be great as well. Thanks for joining us live. Thanks for tuning in and listening to the podcast if you are listening to a recording. And we'll see you next month. Thanks very much. You're listening to Run Chat Live podcast, putting the evidence back into running injury and performance.